Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. We have a lot of important stuff to talk about, primarily in relation to the ceasefire deal and where things are going. And the other thing is the attacks of Israel in Syria. Things are escalating in Syria. What context are they coming in, and where are things going in Syria? This is very important and very dangerous. But we're going to start off with Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu decided to delay, against the advice of his security advisors and the security leadership inside of Israel, the release of Palestinian prisoners following the release of the Israeli prisoners of war from Gaza last Saturday. It looks like now this has been solved. There was a report, a confirmation sent to Al Jazeera saying that there has been a solution now. Both parties had an agreement, and there were also reports in Israel signaling that they will receive the remaining bodies of the Israeli prisoners of war from Gaza. What does that mean? That means that Benjamin Netanyahu had this move just as a show. We're talking a lot about Benjamin Netanyahu and his shows, the shows of strength or shows of authority, to hide the fact that he has been humiliated and defeated in Gaza. This is what it's all about when Netanyahu starts to delay or tries to impose his will, or put sticks in the wheels of the ceasefire agreement, trying to dictate, trying to show that he is the person who has the full authority, when later on he concedes or he does a U-turn. This means that the prospect of the Palestinian resistance receiving the 600 Palestinians who were due to be released on Saturday is now very likely. It looks like it's going to be implemented in the next few days. However, no further details have been revealed on the timing or the numbers who are going to be released tomorrow, or if it's going to be the day after, or if it's going to be the weekend, if it's going to be in 2 knocks, or if it's going to be in 1 knock. Again, a good development in relation to the ceasefire. However, no confirmation about phase 2. No confirmation about phase 2, but there are proposals coming from Israel. They have a new idea now. The opposition leader, Yair Lapid, he actually proposed that let Egypt actually control Gaza. And he had multiple points in his rationale of Egypt controlling Gaza to get this problem solved, according to Israel. He said, Israel seeks to transfer control of Gaza to an entity other than Hamas, one that has the capability to maintain security. Gaza cannot be rebuilt without a recognized body to oversee the reconstruction effort and ensure security in coordination with Israel. Israel and Egypt have a deep and long-standing strategic relationship supported by the United States. Egypt wants to prevent the idea of transferring Gaza's population to Egypt. Egypt has an economic incentive that strengthens its government and helps sustain its citizens. And he continued about the model. The current ceasefire will be completed until all hostages are released, with Israel maintaining its perimeter or the buffer zone across the border between Israel and Gaza. Then, Egypt will take control of the Gaza Strip through a United Nations Security Council resolution overseeing both internal security and civil administration. 3. This control will be defined as custodianship, with the goal of transferring Gaza to the Palestinian Authority after the process of reform and, according to him, de-radicalization of Gaza, not Israel, based on measurable benchmarks. Then he continued, the reconstruction process will begin under Egyptian supervision, with Saudi Arabia and the Abraham Accords countries participating in working groups modeled after the Negev Forum. Egypt will allow Gaza residents who wish to leave and have a destination to do so in an orderly manner. The United States will invest in Gaza in coordination with Egypt. Egypt will work to prevent weapons smuggling into Gaza, dismantle tunnels, and eliminate the remaining terrorist infrastructure, according to him. A joint Egyptian-Israeli-American security mechanism will be established to address immediate threats. He's also suggesting that 155 billion of debt will be lifted Gone. No debt, Egypt, you can have fun. So, thorough plan. And this is not new, of course, the plan to have Egypt controlling Gaza. It's been old. But this time, what's different is the Israelis are coming with in-depth proposals, with deals, with details, and a lot of in-depth talk, a lot of in-depth thinking, a lot of analysis and strategy. However, the answer came pretty quickly from Egypt. They immediately rejected it. According to multiple reports, they will not be controlling Gaza because they know where Israel wants to lead them. If they control Gaza, they will have responsibility. They will have liability. The Palestinian people have aspirations, and these aspirations will continue to be represented by the Palestinian population. If those aspirations are represented in a form of, for example, armed resistance against an occupying entity called Israel, then Egypt will be the country responsible for these attacks, therefore be liable to any aggression from Israel and its allies. Egypt is rejecting this idea. Egypt will never accept this idea. As a matter of fact, the Egyptian leadership is still sticking with not ethnically cleansing Gaza, not letting the Palestinian people leave, and of course following that completely destroy the Palestinian cause altogether, which is Israel's plan. And they're still coming up with proposals to rebuild Gaza within a short period of time, and whilst the population is inside of Gaza. So the signs that there is progress in phase one and that Israel will be releasing the Palestinian prisoners and the Palestinian side will be releasing the bodies of the Israeli prisoners of war later on, these are positive signs in relation to the ceasefire. However, the shape of phase two, how phase two will be, what will be the day after, how are we going to come to a formula that will be accepted somehow by both Israel and Hamas, that is still very shady. Nothing is very clear on how it would work or what kind of terminology can be used in the clauses of phase two in the ceasefire. That's with Gaza and that's with Israel. Then we move on to Syria. In Syria, there are very, very important and dangerous developments. Firstly, there was the National Dialogue Conference today in Syria, an event that gathered Syrian politicians, people who represent different sects and different backgrounds in Syria, to talk about the future of Syria. And of course, the Syrian president was there, senior leaders were there. They got advice and proposals, thousands in total, and they came up with a summary after that conference. That summary included certain things to do with the vision of Syria for the future, including the rule of law, limiting arms in the hands of the state, strengthening freedom and liberty, which Syrians sacrificed for, supporting women, children, and the disabled, civil society, followed far away from religious or racial sectarianism, reforming the judiciary system, peaceful coexistence, condemning all violence and incitements, and other reforms in education, strengthening dialogue between the people in Syria, making sure Syria remains united. However, both the Syrian president and the conference statement, they mentioned one thing that is very, very important. The big elephant in the room, Israel. What about them? The Syrian president and the new Syrian administration, they've been criticized heavily for their very weak response to the Israeli aggressions and illegal occupation inside of Syria, the expansion of this occupation and their continued attacks. And we're going to get to the attack that happened just not long ago. So the Syrian president, he said that they are condemning the Israeli occupation of Syrian lands and calling for Israel to withdraw immediately without any conditions, statements against Benjamin Netanyahu. And it wasn't only this conference and the Syrian president as well. There were also protests in the southern provinces of Syria, Why did the southern provinces in Syria start to protest against Benjamin Netanyahu's statements, calling him a pig, calling Syria one state that will never be divided, calling the Syrian people, we are one people, we're all Syrian people, and having many statements against Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu? It's because yesterday Benjamin Netanyahu made statements, and today his defense minister made statements too. Benjamin Netanyahu's statements were, we are not going to allow the new Syrian army to have any sort of military presence in South Syria. And Israel is sending some of its Druze leaders in the army to speak with some of the Druze community leaders in South Syria to try and establish a state. That's being met with resistance from large portions of the Druze population. However, others are trying to play ball or are acting a little bit shady in relation to having an autonomy or having any relations with the state of Israel. Now, Israel with the Druze population, although they had limited success by having some of their religious leaders on their side and enforcing conscription on them, inside of 1948 occupied territories, they faced very big problems with the Druze population of the Golan Heights. Over 90% of them do not recognize the Israeli occupation of the Golan Heights. And as a matter of fact, they reject having an Israeli citizenship, making life more difficult, but for having that position. So if Israel is having a problem with the majority of the population of the Golan Heights, unlike some of the population in the Druze community inside of Israel who are serving, although there is more and more resistance with time to serve in the Israeli army and more people calling to shift paths and shift ways in relation to Israel and conscription, how are they going to have all of this success inside of Syria, even if they find a couple of bodies or a couple of figures who are willing to play ball with them and potentially extend the Israeli occupation up until they reach the northeastern part to have this relationship with SDF? It's going to be very difficult. However, there's no denying that they're trying. And there's also no denying that the responses that are coming from the new administration in Syria are weak. They are not deterring Israel. Israel is continuing to attack. And as a matter of fact, a significant attack happened this evening inside of Syria, south to Damascus, and also in the southern provinces in Syria. Israel is saying, we won't allow them to be armed. Now, of course, Israel had many attacks against Syria following the collapse of Bashar al-Assad's regime. They had attacks on convoys leading weapons, still smuggling weapons to Hezbollah. There are still weapons going from Syria to Lebanon. Many people don't realize that because Hezbollah and groups inside of Syria, they had unknown ways to go to Lebanon. And like Hamas has unknown ways that reach Gaza from some parts, likewise with Lebanon. And also Israel attacked command bases, according to them, or control bases of Hamas inside of Syria, because multiple reports stated that Hamas and the PIJ had an exemption from the new Syrian administration to have a strong presence inside of Syria, including coordination and command. So they're having these attacks, and they're having attacks on the Syrian state. According to Israel, they're attacking places that were used by the previous Syrian army. However, whatever they are attacking Syria. They are attacking Syria, and they are trying to show who's boss now. They're trying to establish a new reality. Now, more statements coming this evening, also from the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, saying that Tel Aviv will not allow South Syria to become like South Lebanon. That's following the attacks this evening on multiple locations in the Kiswa area south of Damascus and close to the Dir'a province. So they're trying to create a new reality. And these things are coming following the statement today of the Syrian president, which was well, one of the most clear statements asking for them to withdraw. Previously, he was saying nothing against Benjamin Netanyahu and the attacks in Syria, apart from very humble messages. And again, we need to, of course, bear in mind, this was the beginning of the change in Syria. Things are volatile, internal security matters. And then you had the previous regime forces, people trying to cause havoc, people actually internally trying to divide Syria. And the new Syrian administration is working to counter all of that. However, Israel knows that this is a weakness and they are trying to capitalize on it. So this attack came following those statements. But something else significant happened today. What was it? Well, there was an attack on the Golan Heights. Israel today confirmed that the IDF intercepted a projectile without confirming what it is, but assuming that it's most likely a UAV or a drone coming from Syria to the Golan Heights. This is something that we haven't seen for months. And the sides who were actually attacking these areas were not from Syria. It was primarily the Iraqi resistance. Hezbollah, there was a very small number of attacks on the Golan or next to the Golan Heights, apart from very few individual attacks coming from Syria to the Golan Heights during the war on Lebanon, during the genocide in Gaza. So who carried out this attack? Well, if the Iraqi resistance stopped attacking Israel months before the ceasefire took effect, they declared they stopped their attacks. If Hezbollah are not actually attacking Israel inside of Lebanon, where Israel is occupying certain positions now, 5 points, then who else is it? Yemen, they're also declaring that we were stopping now because there's a ceasefire in Gaza. Who can it be then? It has to be someone from Syria. The question is, which side from Syria? Is it someone from the new administration trying to send a message to Israel? Or is it another movement inside of Syria that still has the capability to launch drones or missiles against Israel? These are very important questions. But the most important question is, why was it simultaneously launched at the Golan Heights from Syria when the Syrian president, Ashara, was having his speech today in the conference of dialogue, in the dialogue conference in Syria? Very, very, very important questions. And no one has an answer to them. Syria, they denied, they did not deny, they didn't even mention anything. The administration, they completely disregarded this attack and the interception that happened from Israel. Israel didn't say much, apart from the fact that we had an interception, because Israel, they have to, of course, reassure the population in that area. So the population, they recorded an interception and they had questions. The answers had to come from the Israeli government. Therefore, they said we intercepted something, but they did not elaborate. And this came after something very suspicious happened in Israel today. In Israel, there were reports today from civilians, citizens inside of Israel, in North Israel, in Central Israel, and in South Israel, of extremely loud and large explosions. The official response coming from the Israeli army, nothing, out of the ordinary. We're conducting some military drills and we're checking some of the other reports. Conducting military drills, you would usually hear them in one part. They won't extend to the other part. However, there were reports from civilians that explosions were heard in the south, the central, and the northern parts. Okay, so the northern part, we can say, okay, there was an interception next to the Golan Heights, although that interception wouldn't necessarily reach all of the areas in the north. But they were very shady. And of course, you need to factor in that there's a lot of censorship inside of Israel. So it was a very shady day today in Israel, especially with that attack coming from the Golan Heights. But the most dangerous thing is Israel is expanding its attacks in South Syria. Israel is expanding its attacks closer to Damascus. The tone is slowly rising from the new Syrian administration, not to a level where it's bothering Israel too much because they still feel like they can attack. The only thing that they keep saying in Israel is that, well, these people who control Damascus, they don't have legitimacy. You're talking about jihadis coming from Idlib, jihadi thugs coming from Idlib who took Damascus by force. So Israel always strips the legitimacy of the new Syrian administration, disregarding everything to do with the Syrian revolution, the Syrian people, everything that they do. And that all indicates that Israel doesn't have anything to force it to back down, which leads us to the following question. Hezbollah, the other day, the Secretary General, he said that we're going to give the state time to diplomatically and politically apply pressure on Israel to force them to withdraw from Lebanon. The new Syrian administration is saying that we want to work, well, they have said before in multiple statements that we are going to work in all diplomatic ways, and we call on the international community to force Israel out of South Syria. But Israel has a history, and that history shows that, well, they do not concede in politics or just talks or simply by asking them. They only concede and take a step back when they are faced with a real threat, either armed resistance, like the cases of South Lebanon before, Gaza previously, Sinai as well, and if they are faced with a genuine real threat. If they're faced with a genuine real threat to take certain action against them, they might retreat. Will that happen? Will that happen in Lebanon? Who is going to apply pressure on Israel to retreat, to withdraw from the places it occupies? Will it happen in Syria? The Syrian administration, they're not even threatening, they're not even saying anything about the idea or concept of having any war, saying we're tired of wars, we've been 15 years for wars and we want to build our state. But Israel's there. Israel's challenging them. Israel's forcing them to have some sort of a confrontation. Will the bigger countries participate? Will Turkey and Iran, for example, collaborate to try and do something and apply pressure? That is a very big probability. Why? Syria is a very strategic place. Of course, Iran no longer has the same presence and power that they had before in Syria. They were fighting many of the armed groups who are now in control of Syria. However, that move, when the Syrian opposition took down Bashar al-Assad and are now running Syria, it happened after the main backers of those armed groups was in coordination with Iran. Therefore, there was no challenge for these armed groups from Iran. There was no deployment from Iran, neither from Hezbollah. As a matter of fact, there were confirmed reports from Syria that in many cases the armed groups had talks to arrange the retreat of Hezbollah, and Iran from its side, they didn't even fight because they saw that the Syrian army was not fighting and they saw Assad fleeing eventually. And now Israel is directly blaming Iran and Turkey of coordinating. There was a report that I spoke about a couple of days ago in Israel, and one of them came from the Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar, saying that Turkey is trying to rehabilitate Hezbollah, to support Hezbollah again in coordination with Iran. So Israel is already talking about that prospect. And the reasons that Israel is taking all of this aggression, all of this action now, is because they believe they have the upper hand. Syria is weak, things are changing, we want to try and make coalitions. As long as this country is weak, economically destroyed, militarily, they took down the whole Syrian army. We want to try and dictate what happens for the long term, because the more time goes by, the more they say, oh, we're going to stay here for an unlimited period of time. And the main question remains, will Turkey and Iran participate to coordinate between each other with Syria and with Lebanon too, to force Israel to retreat, or will they succeed Will they succeed diplomatically? Because if they do not succeed diplomatically, we are looking towards an escalation that will inevitably involve most likely Iran and Turkey combined in Syria and in Lebanon as well.